Welcome to another episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast. In today's episode, I've collected questions from you, my listeners, all about strength training for runners. I collected these from my email list and from Instagram, mostly from my email list though. So if you're not there, I'm going to plug that in the description down below. Definitely join. It's where you get first access to ask me questions, get information on new podcast episodes, new Instagram posts, and all of those good things. But with that said, I've collected questions mostly from the email list, grabbed a few from Instagram, but some of them were duplicates. And today we're going to answer those questions all about strength training for runners. To give you guys some background on this first, the idea for this episode came after I did a strength training for runners seminar at the local running store. So Running Etc., they were kind enough to have me. I had a good turnout and did a little presentation on strength training for runners. And then I got a good amount of questions afterwards that I thought were really insightful. There were some things that I didn't think about or things that I assumed that people maybe knew already and realized that they didn't. And so that was where the idea for this episode came from. And I'm just really excited to dive into these because I got a lot of good questions. I haven't looked at these questions before other than to put them in this document for me to reference. I didn't really think about these questions. I haven't really pre-thought about any answers. And the reason I like to do that is because in these Q&A style episodes, I like to act like I'm just talking to one of my athletes, so you get a little bit of insight into how I answer these questions and how the conversation would flow, basically. So very unscripted, just have the questions here. Don't even have this intro scripted, so trying to keep from monologuing a bit. I'm very excited to get into this. We'll see if we have time for all these questions. I got about 15 questions up here that I pulled, so we'll see. I'll try to keep track of time and just make sure we don't go too far over because I do have other things to do. I have other podcasts to record and athletes to program for and all these other good business things and coaching things. So without further ado, I'm going to get into it. If you have a specific question for the episode, for another episode, or you have a question for after this episode, say I bring something up and it sparks a new question for you, definitely go to the description and either send me an email or jump on the email list. Either way, just send me an email. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me because my Instagram DMs do get kind of flooded. So send me an email with your question. I'd be happy to either answer it individually for you or put it in another podcast episode so other people can benefit as well. Because if you have the question, I'm sure somebody else does. With that said, let's get into it. I just looked at these to put them in the document. I kind of ordered them in order of what would make sense, but not really. In some way, they just kind of got put in here as they came in. But we did start out with a pretty broad question. This question was, why should I strength train as a runner? So this is a question that comes up a lot. I did cover this in my strength training for runners seminar. It was about an hour long. So I'll try not to go too in the weeds here and I'll try to be a little organized in my response. But why should runners strength train? There's really two avenues and approaches that I take from this. The first one, which might not be exactly what you're looking for, is just general health. So as a human, you need to do certain things to be healthy and maximize your health. The CDC, I believe it's the CDC, recommends certain minimum activity guidelines for maximum health. And those are 150 minutes of moderate physical activity per week or 75 minutes of vigorous physical activity per week and 2 30-minute strength training sessions. So as a runner, you're probably already crushing the aerobic side of things. 150 minutes is not that much for a dedicated runner, nor is 75 minutes of intense running or some combination of those. But the strength training side, you may not be. So what's the importance of strength training? To summarize it, really, running makes you very metabolically healthy, very metabolically efficient, and that's important for a lot of the top 10 leading causes of death in the US. A lot of them are metabolic diseases. We have diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease. These are diseases of metabolism, and running or any cardiovascular activity is going to help you with that. But you need tissue to be metabolically active. Body fat is not very metabolically active. Lean muscle mass is very metabolically active. Now, as a runner, you may be concerned about weight. I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but you can put on some lean muscle mass without putting on too much weight, and it won't really slow you down. But this lean muscle mass is going to be very metabolically active tissue. It's going to use glucose, which, to call out the elephant in the room, is actually somewhat the opposite of what you want as a runner, because it's going to need more glucose, it's going to need more calories and oxygen. So more muscle mass will make you slightly less efficient, but not on the scale we're talking. The scale where it's going to make you more inefficient to the point where you're going to stop seeing progress or maybe see regression in your running is very dedicated strength training, maybe even taking performance enhancing drugs, things like that. Long story short, for your health, metabolic health, you want lean muscle mass, because that lean muscle mass is going to be very metabolically active, and then your running is going to be able to make that lean muscle mass more efficient and more metabolically healthy. And then secondly, you also want strength and lean muscle mass for a health perspective, to make your bones denser, to make you more resilient to falls, to help your coordination. All of these things are going to be better for a health outcome perspective. So that's one side. The other side, which you probably care more about, is the performance side. So I went more in depth on this on my Strength Training for Runners seminar. Obviously, it was like an hour long, but the research does show that strength training the right way is going to improve your running economy, make you more injury resilient, and will improve your run times as long as the running program is sufficient as well. I will not dive into the research because this would turn into a multiple hour long podcast. I already had to summarize it in my talk, my 1 hour seminar. But long story short, the research does show this. You can look it up yourself. There's research on strength training and improved running economy. There's research on strength training and injury resilience, things like that. I think there is a question later on injury free, so we'll save that for then. And yeah, I'm going to stop there because we're going to get into some more questions and we will go deeper on this. So that is my quick overview of why you should strength train. Like I said, we'll get more into it. The second question I got was, doesn't running strengthen my legs? It does strengthen your legs. So the impact from running will improve your bone density and will make your legs stronger than if you just sat around and did nothing. But you also need to strength train. You need to do plyometrics, things like jumping, landing. You might see box jumps, pogo hops, depth jumps. You need to be lifting heavy weights to really strengthen your legs and make sure that you're strong in all planes of motion. So running is only forward and backwards. You might do some karaokes, you might do some agility work, but you really need to be doing strength training in all planes of motion, jumping in all planes of motion, agility and speed work for things like dashes on a field, agility work. You need to be doing all of these things from a health perspective and to really make sure that you're the best well-rounded runner. Think about if you were running on a trail and you had to last minute, I'm sure we've all had this if you've run on trails for long enough, you're running, you look down and all of a sudden you see a root or a rock and you have to last minute pivot, you need to move to the side, you need to change your running gait, your running form, you need to change the direction you're running last minute so you don't roll your ankle or slide and fall off the side of the trail. Running helps with that, but strength training, appropriately applied strength training, is going to make you more athletic and improve your ability to do that. So in the short, running does improve your bone density and muscle mass relative to sitting on the couch, but not to the extent that we're optimizing health and performance and just overall how we feel day to day. So that would be my answer there. The third question is, how do I start strength training as a runner? This is a good question. So we want to start out very low volume. So we're talking maybe 2 days of strength training per week. You want to start out with lower volume than you think you can do. And this is a runner specific issue because runners are used to hitting very long distance runs. You're looking at larger, like miles per week. You're looking at maybe double digit runs if you're training for a half or full marathon or farther. And so when you go into the gym and you see a set of 3 or 5 or 6, maybe you only do 2 sets of 6. That feels pretty low volume to you already. But if you've never lifted before, that's going to be a lot. especially if you're using heavier weights like you should be, which we'll talk about later. But I would recommend starting out with maybe even one set on multiple different exercises. Now, that might be a shock to some of you. You might feel like I'm full of shit and I don't know what I'm talking about. But do it, really. If you go in and do 2 to 3 sets on everything heavy, and you do enough, say you do 4 or 5 exercises for the strength session, you're going to be so sore in 2 days that you won't be able to run, let alone go back in and do some more strength work. So my recommendation is always starting a little bit lighter, ramping up, because it's always it's always easier to ramp up faster than it is to pull back if you've gone too hard. So I would recommend 2 to 4 exercises with 1 to 2 sets per exercise, all between 3 and maybe 8 reps max heavier, which we'll talk about the weights in a little bit based on one of these other questions. But do that for a week. The next week, add a few sets or add another exercise. And then the next week, progress a little bit more. And then after 4 weeks, that 5th week, you'll probably be up to what you expected to start with initially. You're not going to deal with as much soreness, as much impact to your running performance, and overall, you're going to have better outcomes. So start slow, start with shorter sessions. And if you want to see what this 4-week ramp up should look like, check the description for 4 free weeks of strength training for runners. I made this for the seminar, but I've been slowly rolling it out to other places. And so you guys on the podcast definitely are going to get access to that. So check the description below for the 4 weeks of free strength training for runners. It gives you a Google Sheet with strength training 2 days a week, only lower body for your running performance. Upper body you should also be doing upper body ideally for your health, but this program is specifically to help your running performance. So check it out. You don't have to use it. You can always open it up, see what things might be missing from your current program and add them in, or you can just do it as is and see how it goes. It's completely free, no strings attached. So click through the link in the description to get that. Number 4, how many times per week should I lift? This was kind of answered in the previous question. Minimum of 2 for 30 minutes. That's the minimum activity guidelines. Those are always my floor of what I recommend. But if you want to lift more, you can do 3, you can do 4. If you do more than that, it's not really going to be super useful. 3 days per week is a really good minimum for people. So you can do 3 full body days. You can do an upper body, a lower body, and a full body day. Those are all good. If you do 4 days per week, you probably want to switch it to upper, lower, upper, lower. But 2 days per week is going to be sufficient if you're just starting out. And then after that, maybe 4-week ramp up, you can decide if you want to add another day or how you want to handle that, really. That's a duplicate question. Can you recommend a good program? I already answered that, so we won't get into that. How do you keep from getting too sore? So this is kind of answered already in the start slow portion. So start slow, ramp up slowly. That's pretty much the gold standard for keeping from too much soreness. Another thing is to understand what's called the repeated bout effect. So this is an effect where the more you do something, the more your body adapts and the less soreness you're going to experience. So if you go in and you do back squats, say you do 3 sets of 5, you push a little bit more than I said you should, and you're horribly sore. The next week, assuming you recover enough, you can do that 3 sets of 5 and you're probably still going to get sore, but you'll get less sore. And then over time, I can speak from personal experience as well as having athletes myself who we talk about this all the time. If once you strength train long enough, you can do a pretty difficult session and you won't even get very sore. And you probably understand this as a runner if you've been running long enough. When you first went out for your first long run, you probably were super sore. Maybe if you did a long run after you were detrained for a while, say you got injured or just took some time off, you were probably pretty sore. But once you've run for a considerable amount of time, you can do a pretty long run and go about the rest of your day, not feel horrible. So this is the repeated bout effect. And repeated bout effect combined with starting slow is going to help you from it's going to help keep you from getting too sore. Now, you're still going to get sore. The repeated bout effect is more just you understanding that because you're experiencing the soreness now, you're not going to experience it forever. And that's really the point of me sharing the repeated bout effect. So you can put things in place not to get too sore, but when you do, know that the more you do the thing, the less sore you're going to get. All right, the next question is, what lifts should I be doing? What are the best lifts for runners? Is there anything I shouldn't do? So for general health, all lifts are going to be good. For runners specifically, if you want to get better at running, this is what I put in my 4 weeks of free strength training for runners, and it's what you need to be doing. If your only goal or your main goal is to improve your running performance, it's going to be jumps and plyometrics. So things like pogo hops, things like depth drops, depth jumps, hurdle jumps, anything that's a lot of rate of force development at the lower leg. And you should progress these. You shouldn't start with all of them, obviously. And then you're looking at heavy back squats, maybe trap bar deadlifts, trap bar deadlift jumps, split squats, whether regular split squats, Bulgarian split squats, some kind of split squat variation, and some core work. Those are going to be the most impactful based on the research or based on the research of what translates to running, I should say. And that's going to be what you should focus on. If your goal is general health, you can take those and then add on pretty much anything else that you want. There's not really a bad lift. Some lifts might be less optimal, but if you enjoy it, then I'm going to say go for it, because there's no real bad lift as long as you're doing it correctly and aren't ego lifting with too much weight too soon. So question 8, should I be focusing on single leg lifts for my running? You should be focusing on single leg lifts no matter what. From a general health perspective, running, basically anything. But just because it looks more like running doesn't mean it's going to be better for running. So a lot of people, they'll only train with single leg lifts because it looks more like the running motion. That's not really true. It doesn't provide any meaningful difference. So you should be focusing on single leg lifts, but not only single leg lifts. Really, you should only be focusing on single leg lifts because everybody should, because it helps, it hits strength from a different way, from a different modality. It helps with any side-to-side imbalances, but both bilateral and unilateral, or double leg and single leg variations, are useful, and I think they should be in any program, but you don't need to put extra emphasis on single leg lifts because you're a runner. That's just not factual. It's not true. They're good, but not because you're a runner. Question number 9, is upper body important for runners? Yes, from a general health perspective, not from a performance perspective, depending on what type of runner you are. So if you're a ultra runner, if you run with poles, if you run with packs, if you're a tactical athlete, absolutely, because you need that upper body strength. If you're a sprinter, yes, that arm drive is really important. If you're the run-of-the-mill 5K, ultramarathon, not ultramarathon, 5K, half marathon, marathon runner, lower body training is what the research shows makes you faster. From a health perspective, though, and if you just think about the body as a holistic organism, I am going to say, without having the research to back it, upper body is important because you need to be able to keep your posture during your runs. You need to be able to feel good and capable and not have any imbalances from, say, sitting at a desk all day or whatever. Runners generally tend to have weak upper backs, and I can attest to this as somebody who ran throughout middle school and high school. Even though I train a lot, my upper back is still the weaker part of my body. So that's general. Obviously, every single person is different. But yes, upper body is important for runners. It's just not really studied in the research as far as improving your run times as much. So kind of a nuanced discussion, but I'm going to say yes. Now, how heavy should you be lifting to improve your run times? You'll see this in the free training once you download it, but the research shows heavy lifting is more impactful than light lifting. So a lot of people, they go into the gym and they think they need to mimic what running looks like. So they put on lower weights, they do higher reps, but you're missing a few things with that. Firstly, you already spend a lot of time running. So when you go into the gym, you don't need to look like you're running. You need to work on your other weaknesses and other imbalances and things like that. Additionally, I'm not going to get too into the physiology, but running economy is impacted by a lot of things. One of the things is what's called the stretch shortening cycle at your Achilles tendon. So every time you run, your foot strikes the ground, your Achilles and calf and all of the tendons and musculature down there store energy as you move through the gait cycle. And then when you push off, it releases that energy. And so the faster or more efficient you can make that, I should say, the more efficient you can make that stretch shortening cycle. So stretch, store energy, shorten, release energy. The more energy you're going to be able to put into that push off, and the less energy is going to be wasted on other things like maybe form not being as optimal or things like that, ground contact time being too long. So one of the large reasons, hypotheses that people believe that strength training, lower body specifically, jumping and heavy lifts help running so much is because it helps you with that stretch shortening cycle and your running form such that less energy is lost in that gait cycle and more energy is transferred into the ground and into forward motion. So heavy lifts are what have been shown to improve that running economy and subsequently improve your running times. Heavy lifts, explosive lifts, and jumps should be what you're focusing on. Question 11 here. Should I lift or run first if I do them in the same day? This depends on where you're at in your training cycle. If you're closer to a race, I would say run first because it's the more important session for you. But if you're in the off season or you don't really have a big race on the calendar, then I'm going to recommend lifting first generally. And the reason for that is because lifting is a higher skill movement. So if you're lifting and your form is kind of off, the risk there is a little bit higher than if you're running and your form is a little bit off. You have weight, say, on your back. If you're back squatting, that's not it's kind of a compromised position to be in if you don't have a spotter or spotting arms. So from a safety perspective, I'll always recommend lifting first. But from a performance perspective, it kind of works out in the wash if you're in an off season. But if you're in a preseason, in season, tapering for a race, or peaking for a race, I should say, then running first may be beneficial just because you're going to have the most energy to put into that run. If you're doing them both on the same day, I would recommend either doing them as close together as possible or spacing them out as far as possible to minimize any session to session. I was going to say interference, but the interference effect is, if you've heard of it, it's a pretty loaded term and pretty widely misused. So I don't really want to use the interference effect, but you're going to minimize any carryover, basically, and any potential issues there. So I have a good question, question 15, the last question. I'm really excited to answer that. It's a little bit longer. So we just got a few more questions, then we'll get into that one. And then we will wrap this up probably around the 30-ish minute mark, maybe 35-minute mark, something like that. So the next question, can lifting help me stay injury-free? Yes, with a caveat, or no with a caveat, depending on what research you look at. So the research shows promise here. But when you take a step back and do what's called a meta-analysis, a meta-analysis is a study of multiple studies. And what they do is they take the data from all the different studies and they reanalyze it in one big study. So if you do this with all the studies on running and injury resilience, it's actually not statistically significant, which would point you to think that lifting does not help your running injury resilience or injury rates. However, when you control for supervision, so when you only look at the studies that have either remote supervision or in-person supervision by a coach or a trainer, then it does become statistically significant and the data shows that lifting does help you stay injury-free. Now, why might this be? The hypothesis that they have is that supervision allows you to control for a few things. One, you can make sure people are using the right form and the right weight or lifts. For instance, if I prescribed somebody to do something at an 8 out of 10 difficulty, if I'm not there, I can't see if they either undershoot that because they're not comfortable with lifting or if they overshoot that because they're ego lifting. Additionally, form should be pretty self-explanatory. It helps me see if they're using the right form or not. But then secondly, There's a thing in studies called drop-off, where, especially in exercise science studies, a lot of people drop off because it's hard to stick with a nutrition or a training regimen that is provided to you via a study. And so when you don't supervise people, you could get more people reporting that they're doing the strength training or the nutrition program, but they're not actually doing it. They just don't want to tell you because people feel bad about themselves. They don't want to tell you that they're not doing what you've prescribed. So those are the hypotheses behind why the data might be skewed if you don't include supervision. But when you include supervision, it does help you stay injury-free. It is a statistically significant result, at least, which means that it's significant. It's mathematically shown to make a difference. Additionally, when you use strength training in a rehab process after an injury, there is a generally better outcome in that return to injury or return to running from injury. And that's why a lot of the really good PTs that are return to sport focused, not just like return to activities of daily living, it's why they all incorporate a lot of strength training, and the rehab process looks a lot like training and less just like, here's some band work and stretches and have a good life. So long story short, yes, it can, as long as you're doing things correctly and consistently showing up and not just putting a strength program on there, doing it one day a week and not doing the rest and expecting it to magically fix your injuries or make you injury resilient. Now, this is kind of a quick one. Won't lifting slow me down? I've already shared that the research shows it can make you faster. The concern here, though, I want to talk to the concern here, is that you're going to put on weight and be slower. The relationship between weight and speed is pretty fleshed out for cycling. For running, people feel like if I'm heavier, I want to be slower. That's only true to an extent. If I have made the decision to put on extra strength and slow down a little bit. I've put on a lot, 40 pounds since I ran cross country in high school. And I was just factually faster then. Even if I did the same program now, I would probably have been faster then. But for a lot of you, for these running specific programs, we're talking about maybe 1 to 2 pounds, maybe 5 pounds or a little more if you're already underweight. And that's not going to slow you down appreciably. You're probably actually going to see better results, especially if you're underweight a little bit, because you're going to be healthier, you're going to recover better, and you're going to be able to train harder. The eating disorders in bodybuilding are pretty apparent, but the eating disorders in endurance sports are a little less talked about generally in all of the world, but they are still apparent. And so if you take somebody from underweight and bring them up to a healthy weight, they're going to add poundage, but they're not going to slow down because they're going to be healthier. And if you're already a healthy weight and we're adding just a few pounds of lean muscle mass, it's going to improve your performance more than the weight would ever slow you down. Additionally, in a lot of the studies they've done for running strength programs specifically, they actually don't see any body weight difference in the people who did the strength training and the people who just did the running. So they generally put one group of people on a running program and the other group of people on the same running program with a strength program. They follow them, look at their results. That's where they see the improved performance with strength training. But they also don't see body composition differences or body weight differences between the two, because body weight is largely nutrition. And when you're running a lot, you're burning so many calories and so many carbs that you can actually eat a lot and not actually put on any appreciable weight. It takes a lot of energy to put on a pound of lean muscle mass. Your body has to literally create tissue from the food that you eat. And it's not something to be concerned about unless you're eating like crazy, barely running and lifting a lot. Also, if you've ever, this is relevant to me because I have a 2-year-old. If you're a woman who's been pregnant, or if you are around somebody who's been pregnant, you can appreciate how exhausting it is to build tissue. So think about that when you're concerned about getting too heavy. It takes a lot to build tissue. And also look up natural bodybuilders, not regular bodybuilders because they are on steroids. Look up natural bodybuilders and respect the fact that these people have trained for years and years and years and years to put on muscle specifically with no drugs. And then ask yourself, am I skewed because most of the people I see that are huge, I feel like they got huge almost by accident or overnight. I don't respect the fact that they're on steroids, most likely. Natural bodybuilders are still massive, don't get me wrong. But these are people that have trained for probably 10 plus years, only trying to put on muscle, lifting like 6-7 days a week. Their entire goal has been to put on muscle. So look them up and look up natural bodybuilders and take a deep breath, basically. All right, 14, this was a good one. This one comes up a lot. Should I stop lifting before a race? So lifting is not really thought of in this way by a lot of people, but it's something that I really am passionate about, and I learned about it from a few different coaches back in the day. It's the idea that that lifting is active stretching, active mobility. So if you do a full depth squat and you sit there, ask yourself, what does that look like? To me, it looks like a knee pull. You would do a knee pull during dynamic warm-ups for a run. It just looks like you're doing a knee pull with both legs. Same thing with a Romanian deadlift, if you've ever done one of those. What does that look like to you? To me, it looks like a hamstring stretch, just with weight. So before a race, what I do with all my athletes is I keep the lifting in. I reduce the volume and drastically reduce the weight and the load because they've trained for 12, 20 weeks plus running and strength training. So if I all of a sudden pull that strength training away, they might feel tight. They may not feel very limber because they've been used to going through this full range of motion lifts. And so what I'll do is keep the lifts, drop the weight, drop the volume, so they're not actually incurring a lot of recovery needs from that lift, but they're still able to go through the full range of motion, still feel pretty limber, and that doesn't impact them during the race. All right, last question. I've been excited for this one. This is kind of a longer one, and it's more of a running focused question. I'm just going to read the whole question, and then we'll get into it. I feel like people are nervous to get in the gym and want their form to be correct, but when it comes to running, they just throw themselves into it and end up getting aches and pains or even injuries from running, and that deters them from continuing. Are there quote unquote running form coaches out there? How do we know we're running properly? Lots of us have pretty sedentary lifestyles with desk jobs, so the first time back running may look pretty bad. This is a great question. I appreciate the depth here. This person actually DM'd me on Instagram because the question box was too short for this question. And this gets into kind of an interesting debate, or I would say interesting spectrum. So a lot of things in health and fitness and in life in general, they sit somewhere in the middle on a spectrum of extremes. Here, the extreme, the first one from a lifting perspective would be form is important. You shouldn't lift more than a PVC pipe if your form isn't correct. And the other end of the spectrum would be the body is going to figure out how it moves best. And so just lift and it'll be fine. My approach from a lifting perspective is somewhere in the middle of we need to be cognizant of our form, but we can still lift and our bodies are pretty resilient and they're going to figure out how to move. And the more you lift, the better your form is going to get because you're just going to get more exposure to it. So it's not something we should throw out the window, but it's also not something we should let keep us from progressing. Unless, of course, you're trying to throw on like 405 and do a 1/16th squat or something like that. So when it comes to running economy is really what we're talking about when we say running form. Running economy is what's in the research. It's the term that's used. Generally, running form, running economy is shown to get better the longer you run. The people with better running economy have generally just been running longer, or they have some genetic predisposition to running better. Running form, running gait changes. If you came to me and you ran a certain way and there were some issues and I told you change XYZ in your running form, you're going to go out and you're going to change that and you're going to be running, thinking about it. Your form may look better, but the second you stop thinking about it, your body's going to probably revert back to what it did before. So firstly, it's not realistic to expect somebody to be able to change their running form based on what I tell you to change, because you're just going to revert back to what you're used to. You take so many steps in a even 3-mile run, your body's so used to running how it has been that you're not going to be able to change it just like that. Secondly, if you were able to change it just like that, think about this. Say you've been running 10 miles a week, relatively low volume, but running, a few runs per week. And I all of a sudden tell you to change your running form. Let's assume you can change it immediately. Let's assume, boom, snap of the fingers, you can change it. You're all of a sudden going to be using your muscles differently, especially at your lower legs, your muscles and tendons. They're going to experience stress differently, and you're going to put yourself at risk of an injury to your lower legs or really anywhere on your body, because all of a sudden you're throwing a lot of volume onto these muscles and tendons that haven't adapted to run that way, whereas your other muscles and tendons did adapt to run that way over time as you progressed. And so not only are you not really going to be able to make those changes just because you have to be thinking about it all the time, but you're also going to put yourself at risk of injury by trying to change your running form. So what do I do with people who have less than optimal running form? If it's not causing them any issues, generally we want to just run more to get better. That's your body will naturally, the more you run, fall into your most efficient running form. But secondly, we can do things like jumping drills, agility drills, to work on your body's ability to produce and absorb force through your lower body. Things like lifting, things like at the start pogo hops, and then depth jumps and trap bar jumps and explosive lifts, heavy lifts, jumps, and sprints. Uphill sprints are huge and really, really impactful for running form. These things are going to, over time, teach your body how to more efficiently produce force and absorb force, and it's going to increase that proprioception between your brain and your muscles as far as understanding where you're at in space and understanding how to move your ankle and foot muscles to produce force in the best way. So if your running form is less than ideal, if you're concerned about it and it's causing pain, I would recommend reaching out to a professional. But generally, if you're causing pain, you want to pull back on volume and slowly build up a little bit more. If your running form isn't ideal, but it's not causing you any issues, I would just recommend continuing to run and adding in things like, for example, in your warm-up, you could add some A skips, some B skips, some high knees, some hill sprints or regular sprints, some deceleration drills, and do these over time. Say, do them before every single run, for example, for 3-4 months, and you're going to see an appreciable difference at the end of it. You can also add these things into lifts, so things like heavy back squats, trap bar jumps if you're ready for those. However, if you're just starting out, don't do those right away. Pogo jumps, depth drops, all of these different things. You can look up running plyometrics, running agility drills, running form drills. The drills are what's going to teach your body over time to get better as you continue to run and get better. So that's my recommendation on running form. And that wraps up all the questions I have here. If any of those things spurred new questions for you, like I said, go down to the description and send me an email. My email will be there. If you want to be the first to hear about new podcast ideas and ask questions for things like this, definitely go to the description and join the mailing list. Not going to spam you. Just send 2 emails a week, 1 podcast email about the podcast for the week, and then 1 newsletter email with some value for you. Other than that, no spam. So, and you can unsubscribe at any time. So really, there's no downside. My last ask for you is, if you enjoyed this episode, definitely subscribe if you haven't already. That lets the platforms know that you guys enjoy this podcast and helps me know how many people are consistently listening every week. Also, leave a rating, and if you have the time and would be so kind, leave a review. It just helps me grow the podcast, reach more people with the message that I have to share of just making everybody's lives better. And also, as we grow the podcast, we get new questions, more feedback, and can make the podcast better. So subscribe, rate, and review 1 or all 3 of those if you would be so kind, and send in your questions. Otherwise, I hope you guys are having an awesome week, and I will see you guys in the next episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast.